Reid Tileston, welcome to Succession Stories. You've got so many amazing insights to share. I can't wait to dive in and let's get started.
Awesome. Laurie, thank you so much for having me. Happy Monday. Happy April. We're going to have some fun talking about selling businesses today. So I'm super excited to get in there.
Thanks so much for joining. Let's start with you. How did you become a franchise owner in California of Anytime Fitness? I'm just so curious.
The most innovative state at making it difficult to run small businesses is you of all things.
That's
I was
right.
I was 23 years old, had $100,000 in the bank. I worked in finance at a small secondary venture capital private equity firm, and I was out at San Francisco's second oldest pub, a place called the Old Ship Saloon. It actually has a mast of a ship that sunk during the gold rush. So, really cool place on Battery Street. Highly recommend anyone checks it out if they're going through the city. I was there with two private equity pros. They were a couple of years older than me, and they were looking at sourcing franchisors. And in doing that diligence, you're like, whoa, some of these franchise locations can do really well. They were looking at Anytime Fitness. There was a couple hundred clubs at that time. It was April 2007. Long story short, took my money, took some of theirs, and went out, quit my job, went out in the California Central Valley with visions to open up dozens of clubs and make a bunch of money and walk off into the sunset. First club, December 2007, right when the Great Recession began in Sacramento. But Laurie, only 20% of the challenge was the economic environment. 40% of it, I didn't know how to run a business. Other 40%, we just chose a bad market, too much competition. Nevertheless, pounded the pavement, dressed up in a purple superhero suit in the Sacramento summertime heat, called Captain Running Man. Can go more to that later. Eventually got the club to make a couple $1,000s of seller discretionary earnings per month, but it was not a good IRR, was not a good return on investment. Those two individuals were done. Anyways, I went out through some what I'll call some lucky financial crisis driven financing options, and I was able to open up an additional club, which did really well on my own. Then that kind of led down the multi-unit top performing Anytime Fitness path. And I've been doing that or I've been in the world of what I'll call entrepreneurial business ownership for the last 16 years, bought and sold four companies. And I think it's really interesting selling companies that really nobody talks to the sellers after they sell their businesses. I mean, let's be clear, owning a business, yeah, pretty popular people, right? Yeah, you got, intermediaries want to talk to us about selling. People want jobs. People want to sell us every service in the world, right? Whether it's, Salesforce or accounting or, financial planning, the whole nine yards, right? You're really popular as a business owner. With that said, you're no longer a business owner, the popularity is not as high. So I wanted to understand what drives business owners after they've sold to actually feel satisfaction with their sales. I think one number which you are so good at spreading the word about is, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but what 75% of business owners have regrets about selling. So yeah, love to talk more about that. Think some of the work that I've done can be of value to your listeners as they are considering what the next steps are as they're thinking about exiting.
And you're interesting, I think, from a lot of different vantage points. And in your background, we're sharing that you have had built up, multi-franchise ownership. And I want to unpack that a little bit more, as well as your experience becoming, kind of feet up on the desk and not running it day to day. There's value to understand your experience with that, as well as your experience buying another kind of business, which was a very hands-on, industrial cleaning company. So let's set the stage for you, Reid. In your experience as an acquisition entrepreneur and going through the process. And then you're absolutely right. We are going to talk about from the seller perspective what it means. But spend a little bit more time with you and your background. So help me understand the timeline. You grew the franchise business, and did you decide to kind of step back from the day to day and eventually sell? What was the story there?
Yeah. So over the years, I developed what I'll call a cadre of entrepreneurial employees that ran the business for me. And the best part about it is that some of the best team members that I've ever had that I recruited, didn't necessarily come because I actively had an ad on Craigslist where I was reaching out to people. They've actually just walked into my life at random points. One cool story, which I tell in the book, which we can talk more about, is that I was at a coffee shop in a small town in California. And I was playing around on my computer. And I like to hang out at places like that just to understand the markets, to get a sense of, what's the gossip in town? What do the people really like? And also, too, I'm completely that awkward individual that will say, hey, thinking about opening a fitness center in town. Yeah, what do you think? We're going to charge like 40, $50 a month. It's going to be open 24/7. I'll actually like ask people that as a form of what I'll call high touch human diligence, because we're going to be selling memberships to them in a month or two. If they have objections or they're going to not want to join, I'd rather know before I open the club than later. So I'm doing one of these hanging out in the coffee shop, and this lady, or not, so someone grabs my arm just like that, like I grab my bicep, and I look up and I'm like, hey, and she's like, are you the individual who's opening up the fitness center in town? Because, small town, word had gotten out. I was like, yes. And long story short, that ended up being a 12-year long, we'll call it an employment relationship with an individual that ran that club for me, which was one of the top performing clubs in all the Anytime Fitness system. She ran that club for me. And I had to write checks and sign the lease, and that was it for the better part of 12 years. And it's interesting to think, though, how it's good to keep your eyes wide open as a business owner, because sometimes like things just literally fall into your lap out of nowhere. I did nothing to cultivate that except just, being present and open to the situation. So yes, to answer your question, I achieved what I'll call entrepreneurial business ownership. I talked about it in this book I wrote, Get It Done. It's a step-by-step for how to be an entrepreneurial business owner. And you have four personas, right? Four avatars. One is you're an employee. We all know what employees are. They're great, the backbone of the economy. The good ones get promoted, the bad ones find the door. Second is you can be a equity employee. That's like a CEO where you have equity in the business, but you don't control, the outcome. You could be fired by a board. You could be fired by your boss. You don't control your destiny. Then you have business owners. I love business owners. I've been one for a long time in my career. That's what I was with my first club, right? And my second club to extend, I was in the ground. I had to be there. It was like a job for me. Then later, as I started to hire the right people, which I think is just the key to it, right? Hire the right people. I became an entrepreneurial business owner, and that's where I could work on the business and not in the business and have true absentee income. So to answer your question, had those clubs, decided that I wanted to go to business school, went to business school, got involved in the entrepreneurship through acquisition space there, right when Chicago Booth was first building it from the ground up. I got to plan the first conference that Booth did, run the student group, and more importantly, be the teaching assistant for the first ever course that Booth taught on this, which, Laurie, was a transformational experience for me. Two successful adjunct professors. It was their first time teaching. Two TAs. It's like 40 hours a week for all of us while I was a full-time student and they had full-time jobs. But that really inspired me to go out and want to crush it even more as a business owner, and also at some point go back and teach it. So I bought a industrial services business, bought it, grew it, ran through the pandemic, can talk a lot more about that. It was a great exit. It was, I like to joke, it was like, a 10x return, but it was actually more than a 10x return. And that kind of solved the money problem for me in life, which is great. And I can talk about why the money was only really maybe the third most important deal in that endeavor. And then now I teach entrepreneurship through acquisition as an adjunct professor. I do academic research on it. We talked a little bit about that. Wrote a book, Get It Done. You can buy it at grititdone.com, 99 cents to the end of May. And I'm just super passionate about the world of business ownership. And, it's been very good to me over the years. So I'm pleasure to, as I always joke, I say, hey, my job is to help people engage them around how to achieve their American dream, because despite what you hear around you, the American dream through small business ownership is alive and well. But what's interesting is that people like sellers, some sellers are happy, right? And I'm not talking about with the money, but some sellers, independent of money, are happy, some are not. And there's some really interesting things that drive where people lie in those two camps. So
When you decided to buy the industrial services company, did you buy it with an intention to sell it one day?
I bought it knowing that there was other parties, strategic acquirers out there that you never know anything with 100% certainty, but I was highly confident provided a stable exit option. With that said, the gold of buying a business like the industrial services one is that early in my career, I opened a fitness center in a town where there was an individual business owner. He's in his 70s, and I was in my 26 maybe at that time, 25, 26. So I'd owned the clubs for a couple of years, and he told me something which was completely transformational for my career, almost like TA in the class, but this was actually more. he said, Reid, let me tell you, at the end of the day, and this guy had owned businesses since his 20s. So it was like 50 years, just so you know, 50-year business owner and reasonably successful one. He said, the money is nice, but where you're really going to get fulfillment, it's going to be based on like the people that you help along the way. And most of those people are going to be your team members, right? You'll help some customers, but it's really going to be about the team members. And it was almost a perfect timing for the advice because I kind of felt that in the first couple of years with the fitness centers. And really at that point, I said, you know what? My focus is always going to be on the people and the industrial services business. This is dirty work, Laurie. I mean, it's a work that excites me, the dirty work that keeps America running, right? Grease trap pumping, factory exhaust cleaning, kitchen hood cleaning, Vector trucks and catch basins, right? I mean, this is like dirty, 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 dirty work. So before I bought it, I said, you know, I want to get into this like with two intentions. One, it's not going to be that I have to do this. I look at it as like a quadrant two activity. I'm going to work in the business because working in the business with a field service business like that is like working on the business, right? It's how I was going to build a good culture, how I was going to understand if I did things like take the business from pencil and paper scheduling. This business, by the way, was doing almost $1 million in EBITDA. And all the scheduling was done out of a red book with pencil for the last since 1987. And I actually I should go grab one of them. I have a red book I took after I sold it. But if I'm going to take the business from like the red book to the cloud, I feel like I need to actually understand the technician lifestyle. So with that said, I always thought the goal of that business and that opportunity was like investing in the people side of it. And because of that, the two exit options that I thought about both before I bought it and as I was running it was either I'm going to do an ESOP because I really think it would be cool to have a field service dirty business that was owned by the employees. And if I don't do an ESOP, then I always have comfort enough that all things equal, I could sell it to a strategic for a reasonable amount of money, which is the route that I ended up going. And that's a whole 40-minute conversation about ESOPs and the great things about them and not great things about them. So I got an ESOP deal approved, ended up not going that route. And I got it approved through an SBA lender, through the credit committee. So I'm not talking like I want to do an ESOP, but I actually could have. The deal was done, approved, like sign a dotted line, go from there. But one thing I think is super fascinating about all these things is that it's kind of easy to talk about them or write about them, but you can actually learn a lot more when you're the business owner, actually like thinking about doing something that truly impacts people's lives and everything like that. So I always thought about it as sell to a strategic or do an ESOP, and those are the two options that I thought about. And I definitely have like some regrets about doing the ESOP, but as I was going through the sale process, I've always thought it's important to surround. Well, I've learned over the years. I should revise that. I've learned over the years how important it is to have business owner peer groups. And it became clearer during the time when I was going through the sale process that, you know, doing an ESOP is really kind of about what you want. It may not be the best thing for the business because the governance that the ESOP is going to bring, it's going to potentially really hurt the agility of the business. And I could show you why, because ESOPs are if you don't like taxes, ESOPs are the best thing since sliced bread. Cash flows to the business because of how the debt structure is taxed, i.e., it's the only way that principal debt payments are tax free, would have improved cash flows to the business. Nevertheless, I could never get comfortable with the government side of things. So my peer groups really pushed me to think about if your utility point is really the team members, if that's really what you care about and it's what you say you do, then maybe a cash bonus is a better thing than employee ownership, right? And they really pushed me on that. And as I really dug deep about that, I came to that same conclusion. So I asked a strategic acquirer that I reached out to for a number. And then I took my Chicago booth finance hat on. I took the present value of what I thought employee ownership was worth at a reasonable discount for each of the team members. And I got a dollar number of that. Then I asked for a purchase price from the strategic that would allow them to pay all the team members retention bonuses that was equivalent to employee ownership. And then the money for me was about the same either way. And I ended up going that route. So, but I go back and forth sometimes. Still, I'm like, was the ESOP the right move or was the cash bonuses the right move? And I say that with the context of everybody who, everyone that got a bonus stayed and all the bonuses got paid in full. At least as of this recording, they're happy. The acquirer's happy. Everyone's happy. It was a big life victory for me and great for the team and the company and everything. But I still kind of wonder, was it like the right move and this and that? Yeah. So that was it's my story of the industrial services
Yeah,
business.
no, thanks for sharing that. And I guess the curiosity is leading me to this question. When you bought the business, did you buy it from a seller who did not have an internal successor or a family successor?
That is correct. He did not have a internal successor or a family successor. He was basically he reached out to an intermediary, a pretty big one in the space, and just wanted to sell because it was the right time for him. The business had done very well over the years, and he didn't. He did have kids. They didn't want to take over the business. He had a key team member that was not in a position to take over the business, so he put it out to market.
And what made you the right fit for that seller?
Nothing made me the right fit for the seller. Like
Nothing.
nothing. I had absolutely no business getting into a business like this. I wasn't actually searching for an industrial services business. I was mainly searching in my lane, which is fitness and franchising, because I still a quote at that point. I know those spaces well. And I also like coach people that want to go down this route. Like either search in areas that you're an expert in, or search in areas that you want to become an expert in. That way you de-risk not being able to find a business because you're going to push your life and your career forward, either way. And I like to give advice that I actually follow. But I also tell people, like, listen, it's like have like your eye for interesting opportunities that might come up. And when I was searching, it was 80% fitness and franchising. But then I kind of saw this cool company. I'm like, oh, this seems to like fit all the criteria I look for: fragmented customer base, recurring revenue, stable management team, kind of like a stable industry. This is like a lot of recurring revenue. Seems like this could be like a cool opportunity. So I just kept on looking at it, kept on looking at it. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. The more I learned about it, the more I liked. And then eventually I fell in love with the business over lunch with the seller at a great barbecue place called Double B's Barbecue in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We went out there and talked for an hour. And I go through the story in the book too. I think this is kind of cool for people to kind of hear about how these deals actually happen. And I just went out there and I was like, wow, this individual is working 30 hours a week on the business. He is making excellent money. He has a fantastic lifestyle associated with it. I can mimic 80% of what he's doing right now. It would be very beneficial for me to kind of up my technical skills. And after I left that business, I was like, geez, this business is just a perfect fit. It was a competitive process. And I'm like, I'm probably going to get outbid on this because there's strategics out there that, are more credible and know more. So I'm probably not going to win this deal, but this is a great business and I'm really excited about it. So I digested that for, maybe 4 or 5 days. And then I reasoned, and again, I had smart people from business school, people that are both very intelligent because Chicago Booth people are insanely intelligent and hardworking, but also that had just known me over the years, given that community that I helped build there. That really pushed me and said, you seem pretty excited about this. Like, why don't you just go there and just really aggressively go after it? So I did. I told the intermediary that I would basically outbid anyone on the deal, and we have a great relationship. He's a fantastic individual. This kind of coached me through how to do it, coached me about what was important to the seller, and that's what I did.
So you
Gave it.
became the best fit. You didn't start out that way, but you became the best fit buyer with building the relationship, and obviously the offer must have worked out well. That's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that background with us. So let's segue a little bit. You mentioned earlier in the conversation, I'm going to dial back, which is a lot of sellers express regret 1 year after the sale. There's been reports on that from organizations like the Exit Planning Institute and BEI that have done some seller sentiment studies. And this is an area where you've picked up the ball in your doctoral research, and I'm fascinated by it. It's something that you've just recently published, and I appreciate you sharing, your research with me. And I wanted to spend some time on that and why it's important. So let's just unpack, right? So you have experience as an acquisition entrepreneur, you have experience as a seller. And I'm assuming based on your story, you do not have seller regrets, and hopefully also your story about the seller that you bought from. He didn't either. But there are many listeners thinking about this, thinking, "Oh man, I just might have regrets. Should I sell? Shouldn't I sell?" There's a lot of things that go into the sentiment analysis, and you've spent a lot of time taking a look at this. So let's talk about it. What are some of the initial things to unpack when it comes to a negative sentiment after a sale?
Yeah, and a couple things to nuance, right? Number one is academic research, right? I can't interview myself for an interview, so I can't be a part of this. And I didn't interview the individual that I that I bought the business from either. But one thing I want to emphasize from the last thing we talked about too, and then we'll dive super deep in this, help provide some context, is that I wasn't the right seller buyer to begin with, but just at every single point in the process, I was always the first to show up. I was the most excited, and both when I was buying the business and afterwards, I was just completely all into it. I got my commercials driver's license. I got technical with it. So I wasn't the right buyer on paper in any capacity, but I became that right buyer as time went on. And that relates to some of the key things. So yeah, so did a study where I basically did a long interview with 32 individuals that sold 30 businesses. And the key is that the minimum to get involved in this study was $500,000 of inflation-adjusted EBITDA, but most of these businesses were well north of that. So you have to understand that you're talking to this study was done off of, for the most part, people that are in the 1%, right? So high caliber, successful, awesome individuals. And yeah, a variety of themes came out of it. So there's two groups, right? There's ones that are high satisfaction and ones that have low satisfaction. And, having vision-based action, uses of competent help, avoided being blinded by the price, strategic post-sale involvements, considerations beyond cash and close, and given the seller's background, if there was an intentional path to business ownership, were shown to be the most differentiating factor. So I'll talk to you about what I think is the most fascinating one, is that a very common story is that a business owner is, either chugging along in the business, doing well, life is good, or they're thinking about selling. Either one, they're going through the process, and they get an offer that just blows their mind. They're like, "Whoa! There's no way that anybody would be so dumb enough to pay that price for this business. Just makes no sense whatsoever. This business is just not worth this much." And they just get that shock and awe feeling around it. Sellers that generally expressed that theme during the interviews were the ones that ended up on that low to no side of the satisfaction, that low to no side of the fulfillment. And there's a couple of stories of how they can get there. One is that, for example, they just didn't think about the culture that the buyer was gonna put in. Or if they did think about it, like in their gut, they knew it. However, they just got blinded, like the price. They weren't able to give that part of it ample attention because the price was so high. And you can certainly share the study with your listeners and your audience and everything. There's just some great quotes in there about how I was surprised how good of a culture that I had built in the business and how quickly the new buyer was able to methodically destroy it. Right? I mean, you hear about this stuff and it's actually true. Avoiding being blinded by the price was a critical theme of it. The other one is uses of competent help, and I just cannot underscore that line. Competent help. There's sellers that are happy selling on their own, and there's sellers. The happiest sellers, though, are ones that use the right intermediaries in the process. And let me put it in a different perspective. Some of the most unsatisfied sellers had the wrong intermediary, and the wrong intermediary both delayed a sale from happening. In addition, they could lead to very bad outcomes afterwards, including the absolute nightmare scenarios of lawsuits that kept on going years and years and years after the sale. Whereas those that worked with a good intermediary were on the top of the fulfillment scale. Talking about how I found that great team member that ran the club for 12 years for me, a similar situation with the intermediaries, actually. Some of the best ones that were sourced were ones that maybe one study subject was looking at buying a business like 10 years prior to selling theirs. And they worked with an intermediary and they were just so impressed for the seller's intermediary, so impressed about how that intermediary conducted themselves, even though they didn't do the deal. They're like, wow, I'm going to keep my eye on this person. And when I'm looking to sell my business, I'm going to use that one. And again, they didn't really charge a lot of money for it, no pretty penny, but they were able to help the seller understand what they wanted to get out of the transaction. They were able to be professional in doing the transaction, and that's how the sellers end up in that positive camp afterwards. So those are two of the themes to go through. The overall general picture that I'd want to paint though from these 32 transactions across 30 sellers is that, the ideal picture painted here is that understand your ideal self and what you want to get out of the sale. Really understand that. Like, go deep and understand that. You should go deep and understand that while you're running the business. You should ideally go deep and understand it before you buy the business, right? And of course, I don't give advice that I haven't followed. I did that with the industrial services business. I knew exactly what I wanted to get out of it from a personal utility standpoint before I bought it. But get that as soon as you can. And my advice is, like, do the deep work associated with it. You don't necessarily have to, like, hire anyone. I mean, you definitely could